It was mid-July, the kind of summer heat that makes you question why humans haven't evolved to hibernate during these months. I was slathering white paint on Ms. Morgan's fence, a job I'd taken to earn some extra cash while my regular contracting gigs were slow. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the back of my neck the same shade as the cherry popsicle I'd been craving for the past hour. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That's when she emerged from her house, 2 glasses of iced tea, sweating almost as much as I was. Diane Morgan, 50 years old, with silver-streaked hair that caught the sunlight like polished chrome and laugh lines that told stories her words never needed to. She moved with the confidence of someone who'd stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. "Thought you might need this," she said, extending a glass that looked like heaven condensed into drinkable form. "You're a lifesaver," I replied, wiping my hands on my already paint-speckled jeans before accepting her offering. The cold glass against my palm felt like salvation. She leaned against the portion of fence I hadn't gotten to yet, seemingly unbothered by the heat that was melting the rest of the neighborhood. "You know, Alex, I've been watching you work for 3 days now." I paused mid-sip. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "Good, I think," she smiled, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches the lips. "You take your time with things. Most people rush nowadays." I shrugged, suddenly self-conscious about my methodical approach to painting. Rushing leads to sloppy work, and sloppy work means coming back to fix it later. She nodded like I'd just shared profound wisdom instead of basic contractor common sense. Then, without warning, she hit me with it. "How do you see me? Be honest." The question hung between us, unexpected and heavy with implications I wasn't prepared to navigate. I nearly choked on my tea. What exactly was she asking? How I perceived her as a person? If I found her attractive? What I thought about her as a neighbor? The possibilities spun through my mind as I stared dumbly, paintbrush dripping white splatters onto my boots. "I'm not sure what you mean," I managed, buying time. "Most people see a middle-aged woman living alone. Some see a divorcee still wearing her wedding ring out of habit." She twisted the gold band on her finger. "Others see a former professor who quit the university to write books nobody reads. I'm curious what you see when you look at me." The directness of her gaze made it impossible to offer platitudes. Diane Morgan wasn't looking for empty compliments. She wanted something real. And for some reason, what I said next mattered too. I see someone who knows exactly how she takes her coffee." I began, the words coming from somewhere genuine I hadn't planned to access. "Someone who planted those wildflowers instead of roses because they're survivors. See someone who offers cold drinks to sweaty fence painters without making them feel pathetic for needing help." Her expression shifted subtly, eyes widening just enough to let me know my answer had surprised her. She hadn't expected me to be observant. Most people weren't. "That's perceptive," she said finally, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth, especially about the wildflowers. "I notice things. It's part of the job." I gestured with my paintbrush toward the fence. "It's like how this cedar needed primer first, but the previous painter skipped that step. That's why it's peeling now," she chuckled. "Are you saying I hired the wrong person last time?" "I'm saying you hired the right person this time." Something changed in the air between us then. Not romantic exactly, but a shift nonetheless. A bridge forming where there had only been polite distance before. "Well," she said, pushing off from the fence and leaving a slight body print in the humidity. "I'll let you get back to it. Dinner's at 7 if you're interested. Nothing fancy, just pasta and conversation." Before I could formulate a response, she was walking back toward her house, leaving me with a half-empty glass of tea and a fully formed sense that my summer had just taken an unexpected turn. I should introduce myself properly. I'm Alex Rivera, 34, contractor by profession, occasional fence painter by economic necessity. I moved to Mapleton 3 years ago after a relationship combusted so spectacularly it left scorch marks on my ability to trust. I came here looking for quiet and routine, a place to rebuild the walls around my life with better materials than before. What I hadn't counted on was Diane Morgan and her disarming questions. After she disappeared inside, I returned to painting, but my rhythm was off. I kept thinking about her invitation and what it meant. Was this just neighborly kindness? To the guy sweating buckets in her backyard? Was it something else? Why did I care so much about the distinction? By 6:30, I'd finished the section I'd planned for the day and cleaned my brushes with more care than usual. I debated going home to shower first, but that felt like making too much of a simple dinner invitation. Instead, I settled for washing up in her garden hose. Changing into the spare t-shirt I kept in my truck and running a hand through my hair like that would somehow improve things. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. At precisely 7, I knocked on her back door. Diane answered wearing the same linen, pants and loose blouse from earlier, but she'd added a simple silver necklace that caught the light when she moved. Her kitchen smelled like garlic and basil. Something about the warmth of it felt more inviting than any home I'd been in recently. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I wasn't sure if you would. Free food after a day of manual labor? I'd have to be crazy to pass that up," she laughed, gesturing me inside. "Well, at least you're honest about your motivations." Her house was exactly what I'd expected, and nothing like I'd imagined all at once. Bookshelves lined every available wall, but they weren't organized in any discernible manner, fiction mixed with biographies. Classics stacked alongside modern paperbacks with creased spines. The furniture was comfortable rather than stylish, clearly chosen for reading marathons rather than impressing guests. "Wine," she offered, already pouring a glass of red. "Sure, thanks." I accepted the glass, careful not to grip it with my paint-stained fingers. "Nice place. It suits you." "How so?" She stirred the pasta sauce, her back to me. "Feels lived in. Like you actually use every room instead of just showing them off." She glanced over her shoulder, that same curious expression from earlier returning. "Most people comment on the mess. It's not a mess. It's evidence of a life being actively lived." The words hung between us as she plated the pasta, simple dish elevated by fresh herbs I spotted growing in pots by her kitchen window. Carried our food to a small table on her back porch, where the evening had mercifully cooled to a bearable temperature. "So," she said, twirling pasta around her fork with practiced precision, "tell me about Alex the contractor. What brought you to Mapleton?" I gave her the abbreviated version. Moved for a change of scenery. Stayed because the work was steady. I left out the parts about Emma and the apartment we'd shared in Boston, the one I'd walked out of after. Finding her with my former business partner, some scars weren't for dinner conversation. "And what about you?" I deflected. "You mentioned you were a professor? English literature at Westfield College for 22 years? She took a sip of wine. "Left last year to focus on my own writing." "What do you write? Poetry mostly?" "Some short fiction. Nothing that pays the bills, which is why I lived frugally during my teaching years." She smiled. "Why I hire fence painters instead of fence replacement companies." I laughed. Lucky for me. As dinner progressed, the conversation flowed more easily than I'd anticipated. Diane wasn't just well-read. She was genuinely interested in everything from my thoughts on the craftsmanship of historic homes to why I preferred restoring rather than replacing whenever possible. She listened. With the rare quality of someone fully present, not just waiting for their turn to speak, it wasn't until we were clearing the plates that she circled back to her earlier question. "You never really answered me before," she said, rinsing a plate before handing it to me to dry. "About how you see me." I set the dish down carefully. "I told you what I noticed about you. It's not the same thing." She was right, of course. I deflected because the truth felt too intimate for a first conversation. But something about the quiet kitchen and the shared meal made honesty seem like the only reasonable option. "I see someone who's reached the point in life where pretenses don't matter anymore," I said finally. "Someone who asks direct questions, because she's tired of wasting time on small talk. I see curiosity and intelligence and a certain kind of, quiet courage." Her hands stilled in the soapy water. "Courage." It takes guts to leave a steady career to pursue what you really want. Most people just daydream about it until retirement, then wonder where the time went. She studied me with newfound interest, as if seeing something unexpected. That's a surprisingly insightful observation from someone so young. I'm 34, not 14, I said with a smile. And I've watched enough people postpone their lives to recognize when someone's actually living theirs. Something shifted in her expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips. A moment I thought she might say something profound, but instead, she just handed me another plate. You're an interesting man, Alex Rivera. I'm really not, I protested. I'm actually pretty ordinary. The most interesting people often think they're ordinary, she countered. It's the boring ones who believe they're fascinating. Laughed, accepting the philosophical defeat. As I dried the last dish, I realized I'd spent nearly 2 hours in her company, and it had felt like minutes. That was rare for me these days. Time usually crawled by in the company of others, making me eager to return to the solitude of my small rental house. I should probably get going, I said, hanging the dish towel over her oven handle. Early. Start tomorrow if I want to finish that fence before the heat becomes unbearable. She walked me to the door, lingering in the frame as I stepped outside. The evening had cooled, fireflies beginning their nightly dance across her untamed lawn. Thank you for dinner, I said, suddenly awkward now that our time together was ending. Thank you for the company, she replied. And for your honesty. I nodded, unsure what else to say. As I turned to leave, she called after me. Alex, would you like to do this again? Maybe when you're not covered in paint and I've prepared something more impressive than pasta? I turned back, unable to suppress my smile. I'd like that. Good, she said simply. It's a date. I walked my truck. I couldn't help wondering if she meant a date, or just a figure of speech. And I couldn't help noticing that I cared about the distinction far more than I should have for a client 20 years my senior. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual, hoping to make significant progress before the day's heat made work unbearable. To my surprise, Diane was already outside, reading in an Adirondack chair, positioned to catch the morning light. She wore reading glasses perched low on her nose and held a worn paperback in one hand, a mug of something steaming in the other. Morning, I called, trying to sound casual despite having spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting which t-shirt to wear for a day of painting. She looked up from her book, a smile spreading across her face. You're early. Trying to beat the heat, I explained, unloading my supplies from the truck. Hope I'm not disturbing your reading. Quite the opposite. I was hoping to catch you before you started. She closed her book and set it aside. I made cinnamon rolls. Thought you might want breakfast before you tackle the rest of that fence. The offer was tempting, especially since my breakfast had consisted of black coffee and a granola bar eaten while driving. You don't have to feed me, you know. I am getting paid for this job. Consider it a perk, she said, standing and stretching in a way that made me quickly avert my eyes. Besides, I rarely have an excuse to bake anymore. It's depressing making a full batch of cinnamon rolls for one person. I followed her inside, where the smell of cinnamon and sugar wrapped around me like a warm blanket. Her kitchen was messier than the night before. Flour dusted the countertops, and mixing bowls soaked in the sink. Something about the chaos made me smile. It was refreshingly human compared to the sterile perfection of so many homes I worked in. Coffee? She offered, already reaching for a mug. Please. She poured the coffee and slid a plate with an enormous cinnamon roll toward me. It was still warm, icing melting down the sides. This looks amazing, I said, suddenly aware of how hungry I was. Family recipe, she replied, pouring herself a fresh cup. My grandmother used to make these every Sunday, said the secret was the cardamom. I took a bite and had to suppress an embarrassing moan of appreciation. Your grandmother was a genius, Diane laughed, the sound warming me more than the coffee. I'll tell her you said so. She's 93 and still corrects my technique whenever I visit. Seriously, that's incredible. Baking preserves you, apparently. All that kneading keeps the arthritis away, according to her. We settled into a comfortable conversation as I devoured the cinnamon roll. Diane told me about her grandmother, a first-generation immigrant who had built a successful bakery business while raising 5 children. The way she spoke about her family revealed glimpses of her own history. Her parents divorced when she was 12, summers spent in her grandmother's kitchen learning recipes as a form of therapy. "What about your family?" she asked, refilling my coffee without waiting for me to ask. I hesitated. Family wasn't a topic I discussed often, but her openness deserved reciprocity. Not much to tell. Dad left when I was 8. Mom worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. I started helping with household repairs young because we couldn't afford to call professionals. "So that's where you learned your skills?" "YouTube and necessity," I confirmed with a half smile. By 16, I was the neighborhood handyman. Paid for community college that way. She nodded, not with pity, but with understanding. Self-made in the truest sense. Wouldn't go that far. Plenty of people helped along the way. And humble too, she teased, making me flush slightly. A dangerous combination. The moment felt charged suddenly, her gaze holding mine a beat longer than casual conversation warranted. I cleared my throat and stood, carrying my plate to the sink. "I should probably get started on that fence," of course she said, rising. "As well, don't let me keep you from your work." Outside, the day was already warming up, promising another scorcher. I set up my supplies with practiced efficiency, falling into the rhythm of painting that usually cleared my mind. But today, my thoughts kept drifting back to the woman inside, her directness, her stories, the way she looked at me like she was trying to read something written in fine print. Midway through the morning, the back door opened, and Diane emerged with a pitcher of water and a glass. "Hydration break," she announced, setting them on a small table near where I worked. "Doctor's orders. Are you a doctor now?" I asked, wiping sweat from my brow with my forearm. "But I've been known to play one in community theater," she replied with a wink. Terrible production of Harvey 3 years ago. I was typecast as a psychiatrist. I laughed, pouring myself some water. "I can see that, actually. You have a very therapeutic way of asking uncomfortable questions. Like how you see me?" She raised an eyebrow, exactly like that. She settled into a nearby chair, watching me work with unabashed interest. "You never asked why I wanted to know." I applied another stroke of paint before answering. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." "My ex-husband told me when he left that I'd become invisible," she said. Her voice matter. 8 KOFHFO fact, despite the weight of her words. He said he couldn't remember the last time he really saw me. Made me wonder if anyone still did. The admission hung in the air between us, unexpectedly raw. I set down my brush, giving her my full attention. "That's a pretty cruel thing to say." "To someone you once loved?" She shrugged. Roger wasn't cruel by nature, just honest at the wrong moments. We'd been married 23 years. I think he was trying to explain why he'd fallen for his research assistant. "Still," I said, feeling a surge of anger toward a man I'd never met. "It's fine," she assured me, though something in her expression suggested it wasn't entirely. It was 3 years ago, most days. Most days, I picked up my brush again, needing the motion to process what she'd shared. For what it's worth, I think being seen is overrated sometimes. People see what they want to see anyway. "What do you mean?" I dipped the brush, watching white paint drip back into the can. My ex saw me as a project, something she could improve. When I stopped changing in the ways she wanted, she found someone else to renovate. Diane studied me, head tilted slightly. How long ago? For years. Ancient history. And yet, here we both are, still carrying our histories like suitcases. We can't put down. I laughed, the sound coming out more bitter than I intended. Mine's more like a toolbox. Heavy, but occasionally useful. She smiled at that, a genuine one that reached her eyes. I like that metaphor. Mine's definitely. A library cart, unwieldy, and full of other people's stories, I can't seem to return. We shared a look of mutual understanding that felt more intimate than any conversation I'd had in years. Something about Diane made honesty feel less dangerous than usual. "You know," she said, standing and brushing invisible dust from her pants, "you're the first man since Roger who's actually looked me in the eye when I'm speaking." "That's a pretty low bar," I replied. "You'd be surprised how many trip over it." She headed back toward the house, then paused at the door. I'm making grilled salmon for dinner tonight, 7 o'clock if you're interested. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing how much I was looking forward to it. After she disappeared inside, I returned to the fence with renewed focus. Each brushstroke felt purposeful now, like I wasn't just restoring her property, but contributing to something larger I couldn't quite name. By late afternoon, I'd completed more than expected, the fresh white paint transforming the weathered wood into something clean and promising. As I cleaned up for the day, I noticed a figure watching from the house next door, an older woman with a pinched expression, watering plants while not so subtly observing my interaction with Diane, who had come out to approve the day's progress. "Don't mind, Mrs. Patterson," Diane murmured, following my gaze. Neighborhood Watch and Gossip Central all rolled into one judgmental package. "Ah," I said, nodding in the woman's direction, which she pointedly ignored. "Good to know. She's been waiting for me to either move or remarry since Roger left," Diane explained with an eye roll. "Apparently, a woman living contentedly alone disrupts the natural order of the cul-de-sac." I chuckled. Heaven forbid. Indeed. She glanced at her watch. "7 still work for you?" "I'll be here," I promised, packing up my supplies. "I should go home and shower first this time, though. It's probably wise," she agreed with a playful wrinkle of her nose. "You smell very authentically of honest labor." I laughed, loading the last of my equipment into the truck. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Diane in my rearview mirror, still standing by her fence, watching me leave. The sight stirred something unexpected in my chest, a warmth I hadn't felt in longer than I cared to admit. That evening I spent an embarrassing amount of time getting ready. I showered twice, shaved carefully, and changed shirts 3 times, before settling on a simple blue button-down that Emma had once said brought out my eyes. I even found myself applying cologne, a Christmas gift from my sister that had remained unopened until now, all for dinner with a client. A client who had simply been kind enough to feed the guy painting her fence. Nothing more. At least that's what I kept telling myself as I drove back to her house. A bottle of decent wine in the passenger seat next to a bunch of wildflowers I'd impulsively purchased from the supermarket. When Diane opened the door, the sight of her momentarily stole my ability to speak. She wore a simple dress in a deep green that complemented her silver-streaked hair, which fell loose around her shoulders instead of in its usual practical bun. She looked younger somehow, yet entirely herself. "You clean up nicely," she said, eyes taking in my transformed appearance. "So do you," I managed, offering the wine and flowers like an awkward teenager. "These are for you. Thanks. For dinner. And, for the cinnamon rolls." She accepted them with a smile that made me glad I'd made the gesture. "Wildflowers. You were paying attention." "They reminded me of your garden," I admitted. Inside, her home had been transformed by candlelight and the soft sounds of jazz playing from hidden speakers. The dining table was set more formally than the night before, with cloth napkins and what appeared to be actual silver. "This looks fancy," I observed, suddenly self-conscious. I hope I'm not underdressed." "You're perfect," she assured me, arranging the wildflowers in a crystal vase. "I just wanted an excuse to use the good dishes. They don't get out much these days." Dinner was delicious. Grilled salmon with a lemon dill sauce, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread that Diane admitted she'd baked herself that afternoon. The wine I'd brought paired well, and conversation flowed as easily as it had the night before. She told me about her writing, currently focused on a collection of poems exploring transitions and thresholds. I shared stories about some of the more unusual restoration projects I've tackled over the years. It wasn't until we were lingering over dessert, a berry tart, that melted in my mouth, that the conversation turned personal again. "Can I ask you something?" Diane said, twirling the stem of her wine glass between her fingers. "Seems only fair, given how many questions I've answered already," I replied with a smile. "Why are you single? You're attractive, intelligent, skilled with your hands." She let the observation hang there, her eyes steady on mine. There must be a line of women somewhere. The directness of her question shouldn't have surprised me by now, but it still caught me off guard. The short answer? I work a lot. Long answer? After Emma, my ex, I got comfortable with my own company. Dating feels like a job interview where both parties are lying on their resumes. She laughed at that, the sound rich and genuine. That's the most accurate description of modern dating I've ever heard. What about you? I countered. Surely there's been someone since Roger. A shadow crossed her face. 1 or 2 attempts. Nothing that stuck. She took a sip of wine. Men my age want someone younger. Men your age usually want... She trailed off, suddenly looking uncomfortable. A mother figure, suggested, trying to lighten the moment. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Something like that. A silence fell between us, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken awareness. We were dancing around something neither of us was ready to name. Tell me about your poetry, I said, changing the subject. Would you read me something sometime? The tension in her shoulders eased. You'd want to hear it? Of course. I'm not exactly a literary critic, but I'd love to experience your work. Her expression softened into something almost vulnerable, maybe after dessert. And that's how I found myself sitting on Diane Morgan's comfortable couch as the night deepened around us, listening to her read poems in a voice that revealed a depth of feeling her everyday manner kept carefully contained. Her words painted vivid images, a marriage dissolving like sugar and rain, the unexpected freedom of a house with empty rooms, the quiet courage of planting perennials after loss. I watched her as she read, this woman who had asked me to truly see her, and realized I was witnessing something precious few had probably been allowed to observe. Diane, with her defenses lowered, sharing the truest parts of herself through carefully crafted stanzas. When she finished reading, a silence filled the room, not empty, but full of unspoken recognition. I wasn't sure what to say that wouldn't diminish the moment. Finally, I settled on the simplest truth. Your work is beautiful. Thank you for sharing it with me. She closed her notebook, a flush coloring her cheeks. Thank you for listening. It's been a while since I've read aloud to anyone. Their loss, I said sincerely. She met my eyes then, and something passed between us, an acknowledgement of the unexpected connection forming. Despite age differences and life circumstances that should have kept us firmly in the client-contractor category. It's getting late, she said softly, though neither of us moved. It is, I agreed, knowing I should leave, but finding myself reluctant to break the spell of the evening. The fence should be finished tomorrow, she observed, a question in her tone, probably, weather permitting. She nodded, looking down at her hands. And then you'll move on to the next project. That's usually how it works, I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the sudden heaviness in my chest. When she looked up again, there was a determination in her expression that hadn't been there before. I'd like to see you again, Alex. After the fence is done, not as your client. The directness of her statement both surprised and didn't surprise me. Diane Morgan wasn't a woman who wasted time with ambiguity. I'd like that too, I admitted, my heart pounding unreasonably. Fast for a man my age. She smiled then, relief and pleasure mingling in her expression. Good. That's settled then. As I drove home that night, the stars unusually bright above the quiet streets of Mapleton. I couldn't help but wonder what exactly I was getting myself into. Diane wasn't just any woman. She was intelligent, established, complex, and 20. Years my senior? What would people think? What would my friends say? More importantly, why did I care so much about those questions when all I really wanted was to hear her read another poem? Sleep eluded me that night, my mind replaying moments from our evening together, the candlelight reflecting in her eyes, the passion in her voice as she read her work, the tentative hope in her expression when she'd suggested seeing each other again. By the time morning arrived, I'd made a decision to stop overthinking and simply follow whatever path was unfolding between us, regardless of conventional expectations. Little did I know that the path would soon become considerably more complicated than either of us had anticipated. The morning dawned with dark clouds threatening rain, not ideal for fence painting, but perfect for reflection. I arrived at Diane's house earlier than necessary, coffee in hand, thoughts still swirling from the night before. The air felt electric with possibility and the distant rumble of thunder. She was already outside, inspecting my progress from the previous days running her fingers along the dried paint as if reading Braille. When she turned and saw me, her smile was immediate, but tempered with something I couldn't quite identify. Caution. Perhaps her second thoughts. "Morning," I called, approaching with what I hoped was casual confidence. "Looks like the weather might cut today short." "The forecast says the storm will pass by noon," she replied, glancing skyward. "But maybe it's a sign to take it slow." Today there was meaning layered in her words, an invitation to conversation rather than labor. Now I set down my supplies, accepting the unspoken offer. "Is everything okay?" I asked, noticing the tension in her shoulders that hadn't been there the night before. She hesitated, then gestured toward her porch. "Let's sit for a minute." We settled into adjacent chairs, the air between us charged with unspoken thoughts. I waited, giving her space to find her words. "I couldn't sleep last night," she finally admitted, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug, as if anchoring herself. "I kept thinking about what I said about seeing each other after the fence is done." My stomach dropped, having second. "Thoughts?" "No." She shook her head firmly. "And yes. Not about wanting to see you, but about what it means. What people might think, what my daughter might say." "You have a daughter?" This was the first I'd heard of her having children. "Olivia. She's 27, lives in Seattle. We're close, despite the distance." Diane sighed, looking out at the gathering. "Clouds. She's very protective of me since the divorce. I haven't told her about you." "There's not much to tell yet," I pointed out gently. "Isn't there?" Her eyes met mine, searching. "I'm 50 years old, Alex. You're 34. That's not nothing." The age gap hung between us, finally acknowledged aloud. I considered my response carefully, knowing it mattered. "My father was 12 years younger than my mother," I said. "They were happy until the day he walked out. Age wasn't their problem. Commitment was." 16 years is more than 12, she countered. "True, but I'm not looking at the numbers. I'm looking at you, the person who makes incredible cinnamon rolls, writes poetry that made me feel things I didn't know I could feel, and asks questions that make me think. That's what matters to me." Her expression softened, the worry lines around her eyes easing slightly. "It's not just about us, though. It's about the world we live in, the judgments, the assumptions. Since when do you care what Mrs. Patterson thinks?" I asked with a smile, referencing her nosy neighbor. She laughed despite herself. "It's not just her. It's my colleagues, my friends. It's walking into a restaurant together and seeing that look people give, the one that wonders if you're my son or my midlife crisis." The raw honesty of her concerns silenced me momentarily. She wasn't wrong. Society had opinions about relationships with significant age differences, particularly when the woman was older. "I understand," I said finally. "And if you want to step back, I respect that. But I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves. We've had dinner twice. Maybe we should just see where this goes before we worry about what everyone else thinks." She studied me, her expression unreadable. "And you get so wise?" "I'm a quick study," I replied with a half smile, "and I've had good teachers." Thunder rumbled closer, and fat raindrops began to splatter around us, marking the wooden deck with dark circles. We moved inside just as the sky opened up completely, rain sheeting down in silver curtains. "Looks like the forecast was wrong," Diane observed, peering out the window at the deluge. "No painting today. Should probably go," I said, suddenly unsure of my place in her home without the pretense of work. "Or," she suggested, "you could stay. Help me reorganize my bookshelves. I've been putting it off for months." The invitation was casual but meaningful, a different kind of intimacy than dinner by candlelight. This was everyday life, unscripted and authentic. "I'd like that," I said, removing my work boots out of habit. We spent the morning surrounded by books, creating organized chaos as Diane tried to impose a new classification system that was part alphabetical, part thematic, and part based on emotional response. I found myself laughing more than I had in years as she debated the proper placement of Austen versus Brontë, or whether Hemingway belonged with brilliant but problematic men, or authors who make fishing sound like religious experience. "You're impossible." I told her as she created yet another category for books I pretended to finish, but actually abandoned. I prefer creatively taxonomic, she replied, pushing her reading glasses higher on her nose. Hand me that Murakami. Would you? He goes in dream logic and talking cats. By lunchtime, we'd only completed 2 shelves, but had learned more about each other through book preferences than most people discover in months of dating. The rain continued unabated, drumming against the windows in a soothing rhythm that made the house feel like a world apart from everyday concerns. Diane made sandwiches and we ate at her kitchen counter, surrounded by stacks of books waiting for their new homes. There was an easy companionship between us now, the morning's tension dissolved by shared laughter and mundane tasks. Tell me about your work, she said, passing me a bag of chips. Not just the fence painting, but the restoration projects. What draws you to that instead of new construction? I considered the question, appreciating that she'd asked about my passion rather than just my job. There's something about bringing something old back to life, finding the beauty that's been covered up by years of neglect or misguided renovations. New construction is fine, but restoration is like archaeology and art combined. You're preserving stories, she observed. Exactly. Every old house has lived a life before I get there. I'm just helping it continue that journey. She nodded, understanding in her eyes. That's how I feel about teaching the classics. These books have survived centuries because they speak to something essential about human experience. My job was to dust them off, help students see past the archaic language to the beating heart underneath. Now who's being wise? I teased. Her laugh was warm and genuine. Occupational hazard of 20-plus years in academia. I can't help sounding like a lecture sometimes. I don't mind, I admitted. I like listening to you talk about things you care about. A comfortable silence fell between us, punctuated only by the sound of rain and distant thunder. Something was shifting between us, friendship deepening into potential for more. But without rushing headlong into complications, the doorbell rang, startling us both. Are you expecting someone? I asked, suddenly aware of how domestic our lunch scene might appear to an outsider. No, she frowned, setting down her napkin and heading toward the front door. I stayed in the kitchen, giving her privacy, but I could hear the conversation clearly. Roger, Diane's voice was cool, controlled. What are you doing here? My spine stiffened at the name. Her ex-husband. I was in the neighborhood, a male voice replied. Thought I'd check if your roof was still holding up in this downpour. The northwest corner always leaked during heavy rain. The roof is fine, she replied. I had it repaired last year. Of course you did. His tone was a mixture of admiration and condescension. Always efficient, my Diane. Not yours anymore, she corrected, her voice firm. For 3 years. There was a pause, and I found myself holding my breath. Can I come in? He asked. For old time's sake. It's pouring out here. I should have made myself scarce, perhaps slipped out the back door to avoid complicating the situation. Instead, I remained frozen in place, unsure what Diane would want me to do. This isn't a good time, Roger, she said, resolve in her voice. I have company. Oh. His tone changed, surprise evident. Anyone I know? No, she replied simply. Someone new. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost feel the man reassessing the situation through the walls. I see, he said finally. Well, don't let me interrupt. Just wanted to drop off these papers from the university. They're still sending some of your mail to my office. Could have mailed them, Diane pointed out. I could have, he agreed, but then I wouldn't have seen you. The honesty in his statement made me uncomfortable. This man still had feelings. For her, or at least the idea of her. Thank you for the papers, she said, her tone softening slightly. Take care of yourself, Roger. You too, Dee. You look happy. The door closed and I waited, giving her space to process the encounter before I intruded. A minute passed, then 2. Finally, I heard her footsteps returning to the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, a small stack of envelopes in her hand. Her expression complicated. Ex-husband, I asked unnecessarily. Yes. She set the mail down with deliberate care. Sorry about that. Don't apologize. I'm the one who should be sorry for making things awkward. She shook her head. You didn't make anything awkward. Roger excels at that all on his own. She busied herself clearing our lunch plates, movements precise and controlled. He does. This periodically shows up unannounced, usually with some flimsy excuse. He still has feelings for you, I observed quietly. Diane paused, hands stilling in the soapy water. What he has are regrets. They're not the same thing.
Do you
Have regrets? I asked the question, escaping before I could consider its weight. She turned, facing me fully. About my marriage, about its ending, or about having you here when he showed up. Any of it. All of it. She dried her hands slowly, considering. I regret staying too long in a relationship that had become comfortable. Rather than fulfilling, I regret not recognizing my own worth sooner. Her eyes met mine. I don't regret having you here today. The simple declaration hung between us, honest and unadorned. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. Diane, I began, but was interrupted by the shrill ring of her phone. She glanced at the screen. It's my daughter. Should take this. I nodded, stepping back to give her privacy. She answered with forced cheerfulness, moving toward the living room. I could hear only her side of the conversation. Hi, sweetheart. Yes, I'm fine. No, just organizing books. Today the rain is pretty heavy, but nothing to worry about. There was a longer pause, and her voice dropped. I tried not to eavesdrop, busying myself with drying the dishes she'd left in the rack. When she returned, her expression was troubled. Everything okay? I asked. Livia's coming to visit, she said, rubbing her temple. Next week? Surprise? Visit, she said she has news and wants to tell me in person. That's good, right? Probably, she agreed, though she didn't sound convinced. It's just complicated. She and Roger were always close. She took the divorce hard. I understood the unspoken concern. If something was developing between Diane and me, her daughter's visit would add another layer of complexity. I should go, I said, recognizing she needed space. Let you process everything. She didn't protest, which told me I'd read the situation correctly. Rain check on the bookshelves? She asked, a tentative smile returning. Absolutely. I'm on the fence. When the actual rain checks out. At the door, we paused. The moment waited with things unsaid. Impulsively, I leaned in and kissed her. Cheek a gesture that straddled the line between friendly and something more. Call me if you need anything, I offered. Even if it's just help reaching the top shelves. Her smile warmed. I will. Thank you, Alex, for understanding. I drove home through the downpour, windshield wipers struggling against the deluge, mind replaying the day's events. Roger's appearance had shifted something, making real what had previously been theoretical. This wasn't just about Diane and me exploring a connection. There were other people involved. Her ex-husband, her daughter, the wider community. Was I ready for that? Was she? The rain continued for 2 days, postponing my return to finish. The fence. I used the time to catch up on paperwork and other small jobs. But my thoughts continually drifted to Diane. I'd sent a text the evening after leaving her house, just a simple message asking if she was okay. Her reply had been equally brief. Processing. Need some time. Rain still helping with that excuse. I respected her request for space, though it wasn't easy. Something had started between us that felt significant despite its newness, but pushing would only complicate things further. On the third morning, the sun finally reappeared, burning away the clouds and drying the sodden earth. I texted Diane, "Weather's cleared. Kay to come finish the fence today." Her response came quickly. "Please do. Coffee will be waiting." The normalcy of the exchange reassured me. Whatever she'd been processing, she wasn't shutting me out entirely. When I arrived at her house, the atmosphere had changed subtly. Diane greeted me with a smile, but there was a new reserve in her manner, friendly but cautious, as if she'd erected a small fence of her own while I'd been away. "How are you?" I asked, accepting the offered coffee. "Better," she said simply. "Clearer." I nodded, not pressing for elaboration. "Good, the fence should dry quickly in this sun. I can probably finish it today." I was hoping we could talk first. Before you start working, my stomach tightened. In my experience, we need to talk rarely preceded good news. Nevertheless, I followed her to the porch chairs that had become our unofficial conversation spot. She sat, posture straight, hands clasped in her lap, the professor preparing to deliver a difficult lecture. "I've been thinking about us," she began, her voice steady. "About what happened the other day with Roger, and about Olivia's visit." Next week I waited, giving her space to continue. "I like you, Alex. More than I expected to, and that scares me. Not where I thought this was heading." I kept my expression neutral, though my pulse had quickened. "Why does it scare you?" I asked. She looked out at her yard, gathering thoughts. "Because I built a life after my divorce. Good life. Independent. On my terms. And suddenly you're here, and I'm questioning everything I thought I wanted." "That doesn't have to be scary," I suggested. "Maybe it's just growth." She smiled slightly, the optimism of youth. "The perspective of someone who's also had to rebuild," I countered gently. Her eyes returned to mine, searching. "Need to be honest with you about something? After Roger left, I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't compromise again, not for anyone. I spent 23 years adapting to someone else's vision of life. I won't do that again." "I would never ask you to," I said, meaning it. "You might not have to ask," she replied. "That's the thing about relationships. They require adjustment, compromise. And I'm not sure I want to adjust anymore. I like my life as it is." Implication was clear, but I needed to hear it directly. "Are you saying you don't want to explore this, whatever this is between us?" She took a deep breath. "Saying I need to be certain before I do. Right now I'm not. Everything's happening so fast. Roger showing up, Olivia visiting. I need time to think clearly, without complications." I nodded slowly, processing. "So you want to pause?" "I want to be friends," she clarified. "Real friends, without the pressure of wondering where this is going. Get to know each other without expectations. And then, if something more develops naturally, we can see where it leads," I finished for her. Exactly. It wasn't what I'd hoped for, but it wasn't a rejection either. And I respected her honesty and self-awareness enough to accept her terms. "Friends," I agreed, extending my hand formally. She laughed, the tension breaking as she shook it. "Is that how you greet all your friends? So professional?"
"Only the ones who write poetry and make me reorganize their bookshelves in the rain,"
I replied with a smile. Just like that, the atmosphere lightened. We'd established boundaries, which paradoxically made both of us more comfortable. I returned to the fence with renewed focus, and Diane retreated to her writing desk inside, occasionally bringing me fresh water or commenting on my progress. By late afternoon, the fence was complete, transformed from weathered gray to pristine, white, a blank canvas, protecting her property from the outside world while creating an aesthetic boundary that enhanced rather than isolated. "It's beautiful," she said, inspecting the finished product. "It's better than I imagined." "That's the goal," I replied, cleaning my brushes. "Leave things better than I found them." She helped me pack up my supplies, our movements synchronized, like old friends rather than new acquaintances. When everything was loaded in my truck, we stood awkwardly. The completion of the job, creating a natural endpoint to what had been an unexpected interlude in both our lives. So I said, "Friends, have dinner sometimes. Maybe next week, after your daughter's visit?" "I'd like that," she agreed. "I'll call you." As I drove away, I felt a mixture of disappointment and hope. The connection between us remained, even if its shape had changed. And perhaps Diane was right. Friendship first would build a stronger foundation, regardless of what might follow. What I didn't expect was how quickly that friendship would be tested. The next morning, I was working on a bathroom renovation across town when my phone buzzed with a text from Diane. "Pipes burst in basement. Water everywhere. Help." I didn't hesitate, immediately calling her. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Turn off the main water valve. It's probably near your water heater." "Already did," she replied, a tremor in her voice. "There's so much water." "I'm on my way," I assured her, already packing up my tools. When I arrived, the scene was worse than I'd anticipated. Her basement, which I hadn't even known, existed during my time working on the fence, was flooded with several inches of water. Books, Photo albums and stored furniture sat in the rising pool, many already waterlogged beyond salvation. Diane stood on the basement stairs, hair pulled back haphazardly, wearing rain boots and an expression of devastated helplessness that squeezed my heart. "Oh, Alex," she said when she saw me. "I don't even know where to start." I set down my tools and immediately waded into the water, assessing the situation. First, we need to get the water out, then find where the pipe burst, then salvage what we can. She nodded, visibly pulling herself together. "I have a shop vac in the garage. Perfect. And we'll need towels, buckets, anything absorbent." We worked side by side for hours, first extracting the bulk of the water, then locating the burst pipe, an old copper line that had finally succumbed to years of mineral buildup and pressure. Made a temporary repair to stop any further leakage. When she turned the water back on, promising to return the next day with proper replacement parts, the real heartbreak came as we assessed the damage to her belongings. Dozens of books were beyond saving, their pages swollen and inks running. Together, photo albums fared even worse. Generations of memories bleeding into colorful abstractions that bore little resemblance to the original images. Diane knelt on the damp concrete, carefully separating damaged photos, trying to save what she could. Her composure finally broke when she opened a particularly devastated album. "My grandmother's recipes," she whispered, tears welling as she held up soggy cards covered in faded handwriting. "The cinnamon rolls."
Ow!
Without thinking, I put my arm around her shoulders, offering silent support. She leaned into me, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability that transcended our newly established boundaries. "It's just stuff," she said finally, straightening her spine with visible effort. "Just things, important things," I countered gently. "It's okay to mourn them." She looked at me with a gratitude that went beyond the practical help I'd provided. "Thank you for coming, for understanding." "That's what friends do," I reminded her. Though we both recognized that ordinary friendship didn't typically include dropping everything to handle a plumbing emergency. We continued working until evening, salvaging what could be saved, creating a discard pile for what couldn't. Through it all, we developed a rhythm, anticipating each other's needs, communicating with minimal words, finding moments of laughter despite the circumstances. As the crisis subsided, and we ate takeout pizza on her back porch, exhausted but satisfied with our progress, Diane looked at me with new awareness. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "sometimes you learn more about a person during a crisis than you do over candlelit dinner." "What did you learn about me?" I asked, curious. She considered the question: that you show up, that you're calm under pressure, that you understood exactly what mattered most to save. She gestured toward the carefully preserved recipe cards drying on makeshift racks in her kitchen. "Everyone would have." "What about yourself?" I countered. "What did you learn?" Her smile was wry, but genuine. "That maybe I'm not as self-sufficient as I thought. That accepting help doesn't mean giving up independence." She paused, then added quietly, "And that friendship can be just as intimate, as romance in its own way." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The day had forged a connection between us that transcended the tentative attraction we'd been navigating. We'd seen each other at our most authentic, sweaty, frustrated, determined without the careful presentation of dinner dates or philosophical conversations over wine. "So," I said, leaning back in my chair, "does this mean I passed the friendship test?" She laughed, the sound unburdened by the day's stress. "With flying colors. Though I'm not sure normal friendships involve quite so much plumbing repair." "You'd be surprised," I replied with a grin. My friends have very high expectations. As the evening wound down and I prepared to leave, promising to return the next day to finish the pipe repairs, Diane walked me to my truck. The air between us felt different, more comfortable, yet charged with new awareness. "Alex," she said as I opened the driver's door. I meant what I said about wanting to be friends first, but today made me realize something. "What's that?" "That whatever this is between us, it matters. And I don't want to overthink it anymore." Before I could respond, she leaned up and kissed my cheek, mirroring the gesture I'd made days earlier. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me at my worst and staying anyway." As I drove home, exhausted but oddly exhilarated, I realized that, despite the day's disaster, something important had been salvaged, not just recipe cards and photo fragments, but possibility. The careful boundaries Diane had established were still there, but they'd become more permeable, allowing for something genuine to flow between us. What neither of us realized was that the basement flood was just the first in a series of unexpected events that would test our new understanding, and that Olivia's impending visit would bring a revelation neither of us was prepared for. The day Olivia was scheduled to arrive, I was installing new copper pipes in Diane's basement, the final step in repairing the damage from the flood. We'd fallen into an easy routine over the past few days, me arriving in the morning with coffee for both of us, working on the plumbing while Diane sorted through salvaged items and attempted to restore damaged photos using techniques she'd researched online. We'd break for lunch together, talking about everything and nothing: books we'd loved, places we wanted to travel, the peculiarities of small-town life in Mapleton. It was comfortable, this friendship that existed in the liminal space between professional relationship and something deeper. We'd both been careful to respect the boundaries she'd established, though there were moments: a lingering glance, an unnecessary touch, a shared laugh that lasted just a beat too long that hinted at the current running beneath the surface. "What time does Olivia's flight get in?" I asked, tightening the last fitting on the new pipe. "Look, 2:30, Diane replied, checking her watch. "I need to leave for the airport in about an hour." Perfect timing. I should be done by then. I wiped my hands on a rag. "Want me to test the water pressure before I go?" She nodded, distracted. I'd noticed her growing increasingly anxious as the hour of her daughter's arrival approached. She'd been quieter today, more withdrawn, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "Nervous about seeing her?" I asked gently. Diane sighed, setting down the photo she'd been trying to salvage. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who's been watching you restore water-damaged memories for 3 days straight?" I replied with a smile. "You've gotten very quiet, and you've checked your watch approximately 400 times this morning." She laughed softly. "I'm transparent, aren't I? Yes, I'm nervous. Livia and I are close, but there's been distance since the divorce." She sided with Roger in her way. Not overtly, but I could feel it. She thought I gave up too easily. Did you? The question was bold, perhaps too personal. But our relationship had evolved to a place where such directness felt natural. Diane considered this, absently running her finger along the edge of a damaged photo album. "No, I fought for 23 years to make it work. By the end, I was fighting alone." She glanced up at me, but that's not how Olivia saw it. Was away at college when things were at their worst. She saw the happy holidays, the curated moments, not the empty conversations in separate bedrooms. I nodded, understanding. Children often idealize their parents' relationships. Exactly. And she adored her father. Still does. Diane stood, stretching her back after hours of hunching over damaged photos. "Plus, there's the news she's coming to share. I can't help wondering what it is. Any theories?" I asked, turning the water valve slowly to test the new pipes. "Several, none particularly convincing. New job, new relationship, moving closer to home, moving further away." She shook her head. "It could be anything." I listened to the pipes, hearing the satisfying sound of water flowing without leaks or irregularities. "System sounds good," I reported. "And for what it's worth, whatever her news is, she wants to share it with you in person. That says something important about your relationship." Diane's smile was grateful. "Thank you for that perspective, and for fixing my plumbing disaster." "All part of the friendship package," I replied lightly, though we both knew I'd gone well beyond typical friend duties in the past week. As I packed up my tools, Diane hovered nearby, clearly wanting to say something more. Finally, as I closed my toolbox, she spoke. "I haven't told Olivia about you," she admitted. "About the fence, yes. About the flood and your help, yes. But not about the dinners, the conversations. It's the fact that you've become important to me." The confession hung between us, significant in its vulnerability. "That's okay," I assured her. You don't owe me an introduction to your daughter. It's not that, she said quickly. It's just complicated. Explaining you us whatever this is. I'm not even sure how to define it myself. I shouldered my toolbox. Then don't try to define it yet. Just tell her I'm a friend who's been helping out. Which is true, she nodded. Relief evident in her expression. That's what I'll do. Thank you for understanding. At the door we paused. There was always this moment now when I was leaving a subtle tension, like neither of us was quite sure how to say goodbye. Call me if you need anything, I offered. Even just moral support. I will, she promised. Then, impulsively, she leaned forward and hugged me, brief but genuine. The first time she'd initiated physical contact beyond a casual touch. Thank you, Alex, for everything. I drove away with the sensation of her embrace still warming me. Despite the knowledge that her daughter's arrival would likely mean less time together in the coming days, I'd grown accustomed to our daily interactions, to being needed and appreciated, in a way that went beyond my professional skills. The thought of that changing left an unexpected hollow feeling in my chest. The next day was Sunday, my usual day off. Normally I would have slept in, maybe caught up on household chores or met friends for a beer and whatever game was playing. Instead, I found myself restless, checking my phone more often than I cared to admit, wondering how Diane's reunion with Olivia was going. Around noon, I received a text, Olivia settling in. News isn't what I expected. I could use a friend too. Process coffee tomorrow. I replied immediately, name the time and place. Her response came quickly. The Blue Kettle? 10 a.m.? Olivia has appointments in the morning? I agreed, curiosity mingling with concern about what news could have unsettled Diane enough to seek. Outside perspective, the rest of the day dragged, my mind conjuring increasingly dramatic scenarios about what Olivia might have revealed. The Blue Kettle was Mapleton's premier coffee shop, a charming converted Victorian house with mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and coffee strong enough to strip paint. It was also, significantly, on the opposite side of town from Diane's neighborhood, a deliberate choice, suspected. To minimize the chance of being observed by nosy neighbors like Mrs. Patterson, I arrived a few minutes early, securing a quiet corner table away from the windows. Diane appeared precisely at 10, looking elegant but tired in a simple blue dress, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a loose bun. She spotted me immediately, relief crossing her features as she navigated between tables to reach me. You're a sight for sore eyes, she said, settling into the chair across from mine. Rough night? I asked, already rising to get her coffee. You have no idea. She handed me her travel mug. I'd learned early on that she preferred her own ceramic to disposable cups. Black today. I made the fortification. When I returned with our coffees, she was staring out the window, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. I waited patiently, knowing she would speak when ready. Olivia is pregnant, she said finally, turning back to me. I blinked, processing this. That's unexpected. Congratulations on becoming a grandmother. It would be, except for one detail. She took a deep breath. The father is my ex-husband's research assistant. It's the one he left me for. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Oh, yes. Ooh. She sipped her coffee, grimacing either at the heat or the situation, possibly both. Apparently, they've been together since shortly after Roger left me. She's been keeping it secret because she knew I'd be upset. That's... I searched for an appropriate word and failed. Complicated. That's one word for it, she agreed. A brittle edge to her voice. Another might be betrayal. She watched what that woman's relationship with Roger did to me, to our family. And then she formed her own relationship with her, I finished gently. Diane nodded, blinking rapidly against tears. They became friends, confidants, and now they're going to be family. She laughed, the sound hollow. Tara, that's her name, is younger than Olivia by 2 years. She'll be a stepmother and a sister-in-law simultaneously. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. I'm so sorry, Diane. That's a lot to process. The worst part, she continued, turning her hand to grip mine, is that Olivia is so happy, glowing. She wants me to be happy for her. To forgive everything and play nice for the sake of this grandchild. She shook her head. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to decide today, I reminded her. You're allowed to have feelings about this. Complicated, messy feelings. Roger knows, she added. He's ecstatic, of course. His new wife and his daughter, giving him his first grandchild. One big, happy family. The bitterness in her voice was palpable. Where does that leave me? Wherever you choose to be, I said firmly. This isn't just happening to you, Diane. You get to decide how you respond, what role you want to play. She looked at me then, really looked at me, as if seeing something new. You sound like my therapist, in a good way, I smiled. High praise. What would your therapist say next? I need to separate my feelings about Roger and Tara from my feelings about Olivia and the baby? That I'm entitled to feel hurt, but not to let that hurt poison my relationship with my daughter or my future grandchild. She sighed. Easier said than done. Most important things are, I agreed. But you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. She squeezed my hand once more before releasing it. Thank you for listening, for not offering platitudes or easy solutions. Right. Friends don't do that, I reminded her. They just show up and witness. We finished our coffees and companionable. Silence. The initial shock of her revelation settling into something more contemplative. As we prepared to leave, Diane seemed lighter somehow, as if sharing the burden had diminished its weight. What are you going to do now? Try to separate my old wounds from this new reality. She paused, looking up at me. Would you be willing to meet her? Not today. But before she leaves? I think it might help if she saw the life I'm building, the people who matter to me now. The request touched me deeply, an acknowledgement that despite our careful friendship designation, I had become significant in her world. Of course, I said, whenever you think the time is right. She nodded, a small smile forming. Think. You, again. We parted ways, but I found myself thinking about our conversation for the rest of the day, not just about Olivia's news, but about Diane's request. She wanted me to be part of the life she was presenting to her daughter. That meant something important, even if neither of us was ready to define exactly what. 3 days passed before I heard from Diane again, the longest we'd gone without communication since the fence painting began. I respected her need for space to navigate the complicated dynamics with her daughter, but I found myself missing our daily interactions more than I'd anticipated. When my phone finally buzzed with a text from her, I embarrassed myself with how. Quickly I reached for it. Dinner tonight? My place? Olivia wants to meet you, I replied immediately. I'll be there. What time? Should I bring anything? 7. Just yourself. And maybe a bottle of wine? The implication was clear. This would be a proper dinner, not a casual drop-by. I spent more time than I cared to admit selecting which bottle to bring, eventually settling on a rich Cabernet that seemed appropriate for a significant introduction. I arrived at Diane's precisely at 7, freshly showered and wearing my one good button-down shirt. The nerves I felt were surprising. This wasn't a date, yet it carried the weight of one. Meeting her daughter felt like crossing a threshold. In our relationship, whatever we were calling it these days, Diane answered the door, looking more relaxed than she had at the coffee shop. She wore a simple dress that highlighted the elegant line of her neck, her hair loose around her shoulders the way I preferred it. You look nice, she said, accepting the wine with an appreciative nod. Come in. Olivia's in the kitchen, allegedly helping but mostly sampling. I followed her inside, the familiar scent of her home, books, cinnamon, and something uniquely Diane, calming my nerves somewhat. The dining table was set for 3 candles already lit, music playing softly in the background. This was clearly an important occasion for her. In the kitchen, a young woman stood stirring something on the stove, tall like Diane, with the same high cheekbones and graceful posture, but with darker hair and a more angular face that must have come from her father. She looked up as we entered, her expression curious and evaluating. Olivia, this is Alex, Diane said, her voice betraying only the slightest tension. Alex, my daughter Olivia. The famous fence painter and plumbing savior, Olivia said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mom's been singing your praises. All exaggerated, I'm sure, I replied, extending my hand. It's nice to meet you. She shook it firmly, her gaze direct and assessing. Likewise. Mom says you're a restoration specialist. among other things, I confirmed. Old houses are my specialty, but I do general contracting work too. An emergency flood response, apparently, she added with a raised eyebrow that reminded me strongly of her mother. That was just being a good neighbor, I said, glancing at Diane, who was busying herself opening the wine. Very good, from what I hear, Olivia murmured, her tone making it clear she was wondering exactly how good. Dinner began with an undercurrent of tension, Olivia asking polite but pointed questions about my background, my business, how long I'd lived in Mapleton. I answered honestly but carefully, aware that I was being evaluated not just as Diane's friend, but as something potentially more significant. Gradually, the conversation warmed, especially when Diane steered it toward mutual interests. Books we'd both enjoyed. Restoration projects I'd worked on that aligned with Olivia's architectural interests. By dessert, a homemade apple crumble that Diane proudly announced had survived the basement flood. The atmosphere had shifted from interrogation to genuine conversation. So, Olivia said, setting down her dessert fork, "Mom tells me you know about my news." I nodded, glancing at Diane for guidance on how to proceed. "I do," I confirmed. "Congratulations." "Thank you," she replied, studying me. "I know it's complicated. For Mom, especially. Life often is," I said carefully. But complications don't diminish the joy of a new life coming into the world. Something in Olivia's expression softened. "That's a nice way to look at it." "Alex has a gift for perspective," Diane said, her voice warm. "He's helped me see a lot of things differently in the past few weeks. The look that passed between mother and daughter was significant. Some unspoken communication that I wasn't privy to, but sensed was important." After dinner, Diane excused herself to make coffee, leaving Olivia and me alone in the living room. The moment felt deliberate, and I suspected Diane was giving her daughter a chance to speak with me privately. "So, Olivia said once her mother was out of earshot. You and my mom were friends," I replied, the familiar designation feeling increasingly inadequate. "Friends," she repeated skeptically. "Is that what they're calling it these days?" I met her gaze directly. "That's what your mother wants to call it, and I respect her boundaries." She studied me, her expression softening slightly. "Fair enough. But you want more." It wasn't a question, so I didn't treat it as one. Instead, I said, "What I want is for your mother to be happy. She's an extraordinary woman who deserves extraordinary things, including a relationship with someone 16 years younger." The challenge was direct, but not hostile. "Including whatever she chooses," I corrected gently. "Age is just one factor among many, not necessarily the most important one." Olivia leaned back, considering. When she first mentioned you, I was skeptical. Thought maybe you were taking advantage of her vulnerability. And now?" I asked. "Now I'm reserving judgment," she said with a hint of a smile. "But I'll say this. She's different. With you, more alive. I haven't seen her like this in years." Before I could respond, Diane returned with a tray of coffee, the moment for private conversation passing. But something had shifted in Olivia's demeanor, toward me a slight warming, a tentative acceptance. The evening concluded earlier than I might have hoped, Olivia citing pregnancy fatigue as reason to retire. As she hugged her mother goodnight, she surprised me by extending her hand again. "It was good to meet you, Alex," she said, her tone genuine. "I'm glad Mom has someone like you in her life." After she disappeared upstairs, Diane and I moved to the porch, our unofficial space for meaningful conversations. The night was cool but pleasant, stars bright in the clear sky above. "That went better than I expected," Diane admitted, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders. "Your daughter is impressive," I replied, "direct like her mother." She smiled. At that, she gets the directness from Roger, actually. I was much more circumspect before I turned 40. "What happened at 40? "I realized life was too short for artifice," she said simply. "That being liked wasn't as important as being genuine." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of the evening settling around us like a familiar blanket. "She asked about us," I said finally. "When you were making coffee, I thought she might," Diane replied, unsurprised. "What did you tell her? The truth? That we're friends, because that's what you want?" As she turned to look at me, her expression complicated in the dim porch light. "Is that what you want, Alex?" The question hung between us, heavier than any we'd asked each other before. I considered deflecting, maintaining the safe ambiguity we'd cultivated. Instead, I chose honesty. "No," I said simply. "It's not all I want, but it's enough for now." She nodded slowly, absorbing this. "Appreciate your patience, your understanding of how complicated my life is right now." "Complicated doesn't scare me," I assured her. "Neither does waiting for something worth." Having her smile then was soft, vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher," I replied, echoing our earlier conversation. "Someone who showed me that authenticity matters more than convenience." As I prepared to leave, the goodbye felt different, weighted with new understanding, new possibilities. At the door, Diane leaned up and kissed my cheek, her lips lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." "Always," I promised, meaning it more than she could know. I drove home under a canopy of stars, feeling as though something fundamental had shifted. Olivia's arrival, rather than creating distance between Diane and me, as I'd feared, had somehow clarified what was developing between us. The careful friendship designation was becoming increasingly insufficient to describe the connection we shared. What I didn't realize was that the evening had set in motion events that would soon force both of us to confront exactly what we wanted, and what we were willing to risk to obtain it. 2 days later, I was at a job site across town when my phone rang. Seeing Diane's name on the screen, I answered immediately, stepping away from the noise of construction. "Roger is here," she said without preamble, her voice tight with tension. With Tara, they showed up unannounced to celebrate. "The baby news with Olivia. Are you okay?" I asked, already calculating how quickly I could leave my current job. "No," she admitted, her honesty both surprising and concerning. "I'm not. I can't do this, Alex. I can't sit across from them and pretend everything is fine." "Then don't," I said simply.
Ow!
"You're allowed to have boundaries."
Ow.
"Olivia wants me." Here she's trying so hard to create this fantasy of one big happy extended family. Her voice broke slightly. "I don't want to disappoint her." "What about disappointing yourself?" I countered gently. "It's betraying your own needs." She was silent for a moment, and I could almost see her straightening her spine, gathering her resolve. "You're right. Need to honor my own feelings too." "Do you want me to come?" I offered. Not to intervene, just to be there. Support. Another pause, longer this time. "Yes," she said finally. "I do, if you can." "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I promised, already signaling to my crew that I needed to leave. I arrived at Diane's house to find an unfamiliar luxury sedan parked in the driveway beside a sporty compact car, Roger and Tara, presumably. Taking a deep breath, I approached the front door, unsure of my role, but determined to provide whatever support Diane needed. She answered immediately, as if she'd been waiting nearby. The relief in her eyes was palpable. "Thank you for coming," she whispered, ushering me inside. The living room tableau was exactly as awkward as I'd imagined. Olivia perched on the edge of the sofa beside a man who had to be Roger. Tall, distinguished in that academic way, with salt and pepper hair, and wire-rimmed glasses. Beside him sat a young woman, perhaps 30, pretty in a polished, professional manner. The conversation had clearly stalled before my arrival, tension thick in the air. "Everyone, this is Alex," Diane announced, her hand finding mine in a gesture that clearly defined my place in this scenario. "Alex, this is Roger, my ex-husband, and Tara, his wife." Roger stood, surprise evident in his expression as he took in my age, my work clothes, my evident comfort in Diane's home. "Alex," he repeated, extending his hand mechanically. "Diane didn't mention she was seeing someone. We're friends," I replied. The familiar designation now feeling like deliberate understatement as I shook his hand firmly. "Good friends." "Alex has been helping Mom with some home repairs," Olivia explained, though her tone suggested she understood there was more to the story. "He's a restoration specialist." "How?" Handy Roger commented, the slight emphasis revealing more than he likely intended. Tara smiled nervously, extending her own hand. "It's nice to meet you." I've heard so much about Diane from both Roger and Olivia. The awkwardness of her position wasn't lost on me. Younger woman married to an older man, now expecting a grandchild with his daughter. I shook her hand politely, keeping my expression neutral. "Please sit," Diane said, gesturing to an armchair while maintaining her grip on my other hand. "We were just discussing baby names." I settled into the chair and Diane perched on its arm, her body language making it clear that we were a unit. In this uncomfortable gathering, conversation resumed haltingly, Roger watching our interaction with barely concealed interest. Tara making valiant efforts at small talk, Olivia's eyes darting between all parties as if monitoring a volatile chemical reaction. "So Alex," Roger said during a lull, "how did you and Diane meet?" "I painted her fence," I replied simply. "Things developed from there." "Developed," he repeated, his tone suggesting he found the word choice significant. "Interesting." "Roger," Diane warned, her voice taking on an edge I hadn't heard before. "What?" he replied with feigned innocence. "I'm just making conversation, getting to know your friend." The emphasis on the last word made his skepticism clear. I felt Diane tense beside me. "Actually," she said, her voice steady despite the slight tremor I could feel in her hand, "Alex is more than a friend. We're exploring a relationship, a romantic one." The declaration hung in the air, surprising everyone, including me. Olivia's eyebrows shot up, though she didn't seem displeased. Tara looked uncomfortable while Roger's expression cycled rapidly through shock, disbelief, and something that looked suspiciously like jealousy. "Well," he said finally, his academic composure reasserting itself, "that's unexpected." "Why?" Diane challenged, her confidence growing. "Because he's younger? Or because you didn't think I'd move on?" Roger adjusted his glasses, clearly uncomfortable with the direct confrontation. "I just want you to be happy, Dee. You know that." "I am happy," she replied, her hand squeezing mine. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." The moment was electric, Diane standing her ground, redefining her narrative in front of the man who had abandoned her and the woman he'd left her for. I felt a surge of pride at her courage, her refusal to play the role of discarded wife they'd assigned her. The remainder of the visit was mercifully brief, Roger and Tara making excuses about dinner reservations. As they prepared to leave, Roger pulled Diane aside for what appeared to be a private conversation. I couldn't hear their exchange, but I could see the tension in her posture, the way she held herself with dignity despite whatever he was saying. When they were gone, Olivia collapsed onto the sofa with a dramatic sigh. "Well, that was the most awkward family gathering since Uncle Ted got drunk at Christmas and told everyone what he really thought of Grandma's fruitcake." Diane laughed, the sound releasing some of the tension that had built during the visit. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know you wanted a nice civilized family moment." "Are you kidding?" Olivia replied, grinning. "That was the most entertaining thing I've seen in months. Dad's face when you announced you and Alex were together, priceless." "About that," I began, uncertain how to navigate Diane's unexpected declaration. "Oh, don't backpedal now," Olivia said, waving a dismissive hand. "It was obvious from the moment I met you, too. The way you look at each other isn't exactly subtle." Diane met my eyes, a question in her expression. I smiled, letting her know. We'd discuss it later, when we were alone. After Olivia retired upstairs, claiming pregnancy fatigue again, but more likely giving us privacy, Diane and I retreated to our usual spot on the porch. The night was cooler than usual, hints of autumn beginning to color the air. "So," I said once we were settled, "we're in a romantic relationship." She winced slightly. "I'm sorry about that. Shouldn't have made that declaration without discussing it with you first." "I'm not complaining," I assured her. "Just surprised. I thought you wanted to be friends." "I thought I did too," she admitted. But seeing Roger today, with Tara, watching them play happy family with my daughter, something shifted. I realized I'd been holding back out of fear. Fear of judgment. Fear of getting hurt again. Fear of the unknown. "And now?" I asked, my heart beating faster than I cared to admit. "Now I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions," she said simply. "Life is too short, and I want more than just friendship with you, Alex. I have for a while now." The admission hung between us, honest and unadorned. I have from the beginning. She smiled, relief and something deeper warming her expression. So where do we go from here? Wherever we want, I replied. I liked the sound of that. When she kissed me, it felt like the natural conclusion to a story that had been writing itself since the day she asked me how I saw her, a question that had led us both to see ourselves and each other with new clarity. Her lips were soft, her touch tentative at first, then more confident as I responded. As we pulled apart, I saw in her eyes the same wonder I felt, that something this unexpected, this contrary to conventional wisdom, could feel so undeniably. Right, I never expected you, she whispered, echoing my thoughts. Never planned for someone like you to walk into my life. The best things often come unplanned, I replied, thinking of all the twists and turns that had led us to this moment. A fence that needed painting, a neighbor with a direct question, a burst pipe, a daughter's unexpected news. As we sat together under the stars, I realized that sometimes the most profound journeys begin with the simplest actions. Picking up a paintbrush, accepting a glass of iced tea, answering an honest question with equal honesty. Sometimes the people who change our lives most significantly are the ones we never saw coming, who arrive exactly when we need them most. What neither of us could have anticipated was how our newfound understanding would be tested in the coming days, or how the boundaries we had so carefully established and then cautiously crossed would be challenged by forces neither of us could control. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.